If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Back so soon? Oh no, what happened?
A little incident at the dog park. We gotta head to the vet.
Oh, not again. These bills.
We can use CashNet USA. We can apply in minutes, get a fast decision, and have the money in the account as soon as the same business day. All right, Cheddar, back in the car.
When you need money fast, be the hero. All loans subject to lender approval. Speed of funding is subject to verifications and your bank's processing times. See CashNetUSA.com for more details.
And away we go. Episode 1086 of the Al Galdi podcast. It is Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025. The day after EA Sports on Monday morning announced that Philadelphia Eagles running back Saquon Barkley will be featured on the cover of Madden NFL 26. No, Commanders quarterback Jayden Daniels did not get the cover, but if you are familiar with the Madden curse, that may be a good thing. The Madden curse is a bit exaggerated, but it's not nothing. San Francisco 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey, brother of Commanders receiver Luke McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey was featured on the cover of Madden NFL 25, and his 2024 season was ravaged by injury, so maybe we are better off with Jayden Daniels not being featured on the cover of Madden NFL 26. Hello and welcome to this Tuesday installment of the Al Galdi podcast. Also on Monday, the Professional Football Writers of America, the PFWA, it on Monday afternoon named the Commanders' public relations staff as the winner of the PFWA's 2025 Pete Rozelle Award, which, quote, is given to the NFL public relations staff that consistently strives for excellence in its dealings and relationships with the media, end quote. So yet another sign that the Commanders' culture under the ownership of the Josh Harris Group is much improved. Also a sign of this is the team's offensive coaching staff, which stunningly has remained mostly intact this offseason despite the offense being elite this past season. The Commanders' offensive coaching staff continuity and the resulting quality ecosystem for Jayden Daniels. Our next segment, I'm going to explore all of this off telling comments from head coach Dan Quinn last week. The number one positive for the team this offseason may well be that the top 5 offensive assistant coaches in terms of Daniels all are coming back. What might that mean for the team's offense this coming season? And also on the show, the Wizards. I said, also on the show, the Wizards.
The damn Washington Wizards.
Yes, thank you, Stephen A. Smith. I will speak with Wizards insider Chase Hughes of Monumental Sports Network. With Chase, we'll discuss the possibilities and philosophies for the Wizards with their number 6 overall pick in the 2025 NBA Draft, which is happening on June 25th and June 26th. And with Chase, we'll explore the takeaways for our rebuilding and tanking Wizards from the 2025 NBA Finals matchup of the Indiana Pacers and Oklahoma City Thunder. What can our Wizards learn from these teams? Chase Hughes is excellent at talking Wizards. High-level insight from him is coming up later in the show. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You can email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Feedback on our conversation with Commanders analyst and former Redskins tight end Logan Paulson on Friday's show, episode 1084. From a friend of this podcast, Bobby Gold, who used to write for Hogs Haven, writes Bobby on X, had no idea this guy was on the roster. Logan Paulson thinks Washington's tight end room could be surprisingly competitive this offseason per his interview with Galdi. Thank you for that, Bobby. And the guy who Bobby had no idea was on the roster is Lawrence Cager. The most interesting thing to me from Logan Paulson's appearance on Friday's show was what he said about the Commanders at tight end. He had high praise for three non-obvious guys in Tyree Jackson, Lawrence Cager, and Cole Turner. The Commanders this past January 8th announced the signing of Cager to a reserve/future contract, and the Commanders this past January 28th announced the signing of Jackson to a reserve/future contract and announced the re-signing of Turner to a reserve/future contract. Here was Logan Paulson on this past Friday's show, and then you'll hear a follow-up exchange.
One of the things about tight end is finding big athletic dudes is really important. So when I'm out at practice, I see Tyree Jackson, the converted quarterback from Buffalo, who's running. He's 6'7". He looks like he's about 255, 260. He's running routes like a receiver from the slot. So he's kicked around the NFL a little bit, but I'm like, damn, man, that is an NFL body type. That is a unique skill set. That is unique length. That's unique athleticism. Cager, he was up in New York 2 years ago. He's a converted wide receiver. He's 6'5". It looks like he's about 245. He runs routes like a receiver. And then there's Cole Turner. So I look at those three guys, and because of their physicality and because of their tools and because of their athleticism, and honestly, because of their experience, all those guys have played, been a part of NFL organizations, played meaningful minutes for, in some cases, Cager's case. I say to myself, even though there's not a big priority free agent acquisition, I look at guys that are successful at the position, and those guys check those boxes. So I think that room, to me, after watching the first day of OTAs, it's a very potent reminder that nothing's guaranteed. And when you can bring in three guys like that, and obviously Cole Turner was here last year, so two guys like that, and I think that room could be really, really interesting as camp moves on. If one of those guys really tries to separate themselves and start making plays, what's the decision you make with Yankoff or with Ben Sinnott? Because again, I do think that Zach Ertz and John Bates are kind of impeachable in their roles. But again, if one of those freaky athletic dudes starts showing out and doing some stuff in training camp, I think we could be talking a little bit differently about that group.
Wow, the Commanders took Ben Sinnott in the second round of the 2024 NFL Draft. You think that he could be in trouble?
I don't know if you could be in trouble, but I always think you want to win games and you want to find talent. You want guys that can help you. And so this is not an indictment of Ben. I just think it's a much more competitive room than I thought at the beginning of the offseason. And again, I think obviously teams, they made an investment in Ben. They want him to be around, obviously. He's a second round pick. You've covered the NFL long enough to understand that investment, why it's significant. But I look at those other guys they brought in, guys that have played football, guys that look very unique in terms of their physical prowess and physical ability. And I don't think it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 like it was last year. I think there's a possibility one of those guys, including Cole Turner, makes some waves this offseason.
That really stood out to me from Logan Paulson, and that certainly is an indication that Ben Sinnott is on notice. So the Commanders on March 11th announced the re-signings of tight end Zach Ertz and John Bates, each of whom was set to be an unrestricted free agent this offseason. So Ertz and Bates are the numbers 1 and 2 tight ends on the team, respectively. The Commanders, as mentioned, took Ben Sinnott in the second round of the 2024 NFL Draft, but he had a disappointing rookie season. And as Logan Paulson indicated, nothing is guaranteed. Email from Martin Davison. Subject of the email, quote, "You know whose new offseason job," end quote. Writes Martin, "Hey Al, spending some vacation time in Iceland and saw this picture outside a coffee house. Seems like KC is splitting his time between here and Atlanta. Thanks for the great show, which I listen to almost every day, including when in Iceland." Thank you very much for that, Martin. The reach of this podcast extending to Iceland. Outstanding. You know who. The mere mention of his actual name triggers people in all kinds of ways. And so we on this podcast simply refer to him as you know who. The picture that Martin included in his email is of a worker at this coffee house in Iceland. And yeah, the guy does look a good bit like you know who. What is going to happen with our guy, you know who? Are the Atlanta Falcons going to trade him? The Falcons in March 2024 signed you know who as an unrestricted free agent to a reported 4-year, $180 million contract with $90 million fully guaranteed. And then the following month, shockingly, took Washington quarterback Michael Penix Jr. with the number 8 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. Now, you know who reportedly has a no-trade clause. The Pittsburgh Steelers have come up as a possible trade destination for you-know-who if the Steelers do not sign unrestricted free agent quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Truth be told, though, the Steelers may well be better off acquiring neither guy and just bottoming out and getting a high pick at what right now is viewed as a quarterback-rich 2026 NFL Draft. The Steelers need to truly address quarterback. They, in a lot of ways, are being held captive by this streak for Mike Tomlin. 0 losing regular seasons over 18 seasons as Steelers head coach. It is an amazing streak, to be sure, but sometimes you need to take a step back to take 3 steps forward. The finals, they start this week. Indiana at Oklahoma City, Thursday night at 8:30. Do not miss your last chance to cash in on the basketball season with Prize Picks, which is offering free cash to listeners of this podcast. Download the app and use the promo code Galdi, my last name, Galdi. You do that, you get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Yeah, you get $50 when you play $5. Prize Picks Pick'em is available in Virginia and Washington, D.C. You just pick more or less on players in various statistical categories. And Prize Picks Streak has arrived in Maryland. You make a free daily pick. Just choose more or less on one featured player projection each day and build your streak by winning for 2 or more days. Each correct pick grows your streak. All of this on Prize Picks, which is great for basketball, baseball, and hockey. Heck, you on Prize Picks can mix and match player projections from different sports. Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Prize Picks is the best daily fantasy sports app, and Prize Picks has a special deal for listeners of the Al Galdi podcast. Download the app. Use the promo code Galdi, my last name, Galdi. You do that, you get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Yes, $50 instantly when you play $5. Prize Picks is awesome. I've used it. It's a ton of fun. It's easy to use. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your opinions into real money on Prize Picks and take advantage of what Prize Picks is offering to listeners of the Al Galdi podcast. Download the app. Use the promo code Galdi, and you get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game.
Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, and maybe even a whole new life. So why not start the journey today? There's over a dozen languages available to learn at your own pace so you can achieve your goals with material tailored to your individual proficiency level, interests, and time availability. I'm finally learning French after taking classes in high school and thrilled to finish what I'd started years ago. And my favorite part about Babbel is that it's dialogue-based. It helps me to actually practice conversations, and the speech recognition ensures I'm saying words, correct them all. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/bluewire. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/bluewire, spelled BABBEL.com/bluewire. Babbel.com/bluewire. Rules and restrictions may apply.
If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, please consider subscribing to the podcast if you're not already doing that. Subscribing to the podcast costs nothing. Make sure that you never miss an episode and helps out the podcast a lot. And if you're already subscribing, thank you. This is week 2 of phase 3 of the Commanders' 2025 offseason. We last week had the first OTA days of the team's offseason, May 28th and May 30th. We this week have the final 3 OTA days of the team's offseason, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. The Wednesday OTA practice is open to the media. And then the Commanders' 2025 mandatory minicamp is next week, June 10th through the 12th. Commanders head coach Dan Quinn, he last Wednesday afternoon did a post-practice press conference following the team's first OTA practice of this offseason, a practice that was open to the media. And Quinn, during his opening statement of that press conference, made it a point to praise his coaching staff. This was Quinn on his coaches.
This time of year, it's so much about them and their time to shine and the teaching and the emphasis that has to be put in. And teaching those systems on, all three phases. And so to have, the crew back, that doesn't happen very often. And I want to take a minute and say how much I appreciate that and them, because I really do.
Dan Quinn, quote, "To have the crew back, that doesn't happen very often," end quote. No, it does not. And this, to me, is the most underrated development of the Commanders' 2025 offseason, that Dan Quinn's coaching staff has remained nearly entirely intact. The only significant coaching staff departure for the team this offseason has been the departure of assistant special teams coach John Glenn. The Las Vegas Raiders, they on February 11th, in announcing their 2025 coaching staff, announced the hiring of Glenn as linebackers coach. Glenn, in leaving the Commanders for the Raiders, reunited with Pete Carroll, who the Raiders this past January 25th announced as their head coach. Glenn spent the 2018 through 2023 seasons as the Seattle Seahawks linebackers coach. He was with the Seahawks for 12 seasons, 2012 through 2023. Carroll was the Seahawks executive vice president of football operations and head coach January 2010 to January 2024. The Commanders on February 18th announced the hiring of Brian Schneider as assistant special teams coordinator to succeed Glenn. Schneider was the San Francisco 49ers special teams coordinator March 2022 to this past January when he was fired by the Niners. But Schneider was with the Niners during Commanders general manager Adam Peters' time as the Niners assistant general manager. Peters was the Niners assistant GM February 2021 to January 2024 when he was hired by the Commanders. So John Glenn out, Brian Schneider in. That's basically it for coaching staff change for the Commanders this offseason. I mean, if you really want to get deep in the weeds, so the Commanders on February 18th announced the hiring of Jesse Madden as an offensive quality control coach. Jesse Madden, the grandson of Pro Football Hall of Famer John Madden. Jesse Madden entering his first season in the NFL after graduating from the University of Michigan. Madden at Michigan played quarterback in his freshman season, then switched to defensive back. He was a member of the Michigan team that won the College Football Playoff National Championship for the 2023 season. Also on that team, Commanders cornerback Mikey Sainristil. But for the Commanders, what essentially is the case is that their offensive coaching staff remains intact and their defensive coaching staff remains intact. Now, of course, the defense is coming off a mediocre at best season, so we'll see if the defensive coaching staff remaining intact was worthy of celebration. But the offense is coming off a great season, and the overwhelming sentiment as recently as this past January was that a poaching of the Commanders' offensive coaching staff was coming, that the Commanders in the 2024 season, having an elite offense and having done such a good job with rookie quarterback Jayden Daniels, would result in one or more of the team's offensive assistants leaving for jobs with other NFL teams. But no such departures have happened. And the real value here is with the Commanders' top 5 offensive assistants in terms of Jayden Daniels. Now, yes, not all of the Commanders' offensive assistants remaining with the team is necessarily by choice. We on February 2nd had reports that David Blau was staying with the Commanders, at least in part because they had prevented him from interviewing with other NFL teams. So we on February 2nd had reports that the Commanders had denied the New York Jets' request to interview Blau for their quarterbacks coach job. And Commanders insider John Keim of ESPN, he on February 2nd reported that the Commanders also denied the Chicago Bears' request to interview Blau for their passing game coordinator job and denied the Jacksonville Jaguars' request to interview Blau for their quarterbacks coach job. Also, multiple Commanders offensive assistants this offseason interviewed for offensive coordinator jobs that the assistants did not get. Brian Johnson on January 31st reportedly interviewed for the Houston Texans offensive coordinator vacancy. He did not get that job. The Jacksonville Jaguars late night on January 29th announced having interviewed Tavita Pritchard for the Jags offensive coordinator vacancy. He did not get that job. But bottom line, each of the Commanders' top 5 offensive assistants pertaining to Jayden Daniels is coming back for the 2025 season. Offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury, assistant head coach / offensive pass game coordinator Brian Johnson, run game coordinator / running backs coach Anthony Lynn, quarterbacks coach Tavita Pritchard, and assistant quarterbacks coach David Blau. And in the case of Kingsbury, he in January chose to stay as opposed to pursuing an NFL head coaching job. We on this podcast have talked about this coaching staff continuity, but I don't think that there has been enough appreciation for this. And I think that it's exciting to think about the value of this. Jayden Daniels, coming off his all-time great rookie season, being in the same offense with the same top 5 offensive assistant coaches for his second NFL season. To say nothing of the team having bolstered the offensive line via trading for left tackle Laramie Tunsil and taking offensive lineman Josh Connerly Jr. with the number 29 overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. To say nothing of the team having traded for receiver Deebo Samuel Sr. Look, nothing's guaranteed, but boy, it would seem that Daniels has been set up quite nicely to have a great second NFL season. We later, during the Dan Quinn post-practice press conference this past Wednesday afternoon, had this exchange.
Back to the coaching staff, how rare is it to retain so much of a coaching staff, and then how big of an advantage is that even in...
It's a really big deal, and that's why I did lead off with that intentionally, because I don't think we've got a chance to really talk about that as much as I thought we would, because looking back for me, it's pretty rare. And we've also added in Brian Schneider, somebody that I've had some experience with, who is also another true heavy hitter on the special team side. But I guess it fast tracks some of the things that we understand, but it also allows us probably to get a little deeper, than we were in year one, to get closer, better understanding of one another, and that's been a big deal for me. So year one to year two for a player is big. For coaches, it's big too. And so, I really appreciate that.
And we heard Dan Quinn mention that the extreme coaching staff continuity that the Commanders are enjoying is pretty rare. One of the things that doomed Quinn as Atlanta Falcons head coach was not being properly prepared for coaching staff change. Quinn was the Falcons head coach February 2015 to October 2020. His overall regular season record as Falcons head coach was 43-42. Former Redskins offensive coordinator and current Niners head coach Kyle Shanahan, he was the Falcons offensive coordinator January 2015 to February 2017. Dan Quinn's regular season record as Falcons head coach with Kyle Shanahan was 29-19. Dan Quinn's regular season record as Falcons head coach without Kyle Shanahan was 14-23. Big difference. Dan Quinn as Falcons head coach never recovered from Kyle Shanahan's departure. Well, the Commanders under Dan Quinn have really a loaded offensive coordinator succession plan. Brian Johnson, Anthony Lynn, Tavita Pritchard, David Blau, each guy is a viable candidate to replace Cliff Kingsbury if/when he leaves for an NFL head coaching job. We this past Wednesday afternoon had this exchange between Commanders insider Stephen Wino of the Associated Press and Dan Quinn.
With that continuity of coaching staff, from you down to offensive coordinator to quarterback coach, what does it do for a football team when you have a quarterback who going from a rookie year to a sophomore season, having that sort of continuity in the same staff and the same offense? Yeah, it's really important. We wanted to keep really the, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I think Adam may have shared with me, an ecosystem, together of some really strong staff members that we feel excellent about. So for some to decide to stay here when they had other opportunities not to, I think that speaks a lot of what they're building collectively, players and coaches together. And so it meant a lot.
I love that phrase, ecosystem. The Commanders with this offensive coaching staff have a terrific ecosystem for a young quarterback and Jayden Daniels. Now, make no mistake, his great success last season was first and foremost due to him, his talent, his intellect, his work ethic, but the offensive ecosystem played a role in the success as well. Compare the offensive ecosystem that the Commanders created for Jayden Daniels with the offensive ecosystem that the Bears created for quarterback Caleb Williams. The Bears took Williams with the number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. The Commanders took Daniels with the number 2 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. Each guy was drafted to a team with a head coach with a defensive background, but the difference between the two offensive ecosystems last season could not have been larger. Cliff Kingsbury spent the 2023 season as what? A senior offensive analyst for USC, which had as its QB1 Caleb Williams. Kingsbury in the 2024 offseason interviewed for the offensive coordinator vacancy for the Bears, but the Bears in January 2024 hired Shane Waldron as offensive coordinator. They fired him this past November 12th. And then the Bears this past November 29th fired head coach Matt Eberflus. We'll see if things are appreciably better for Caleb Williams with Ben Johnson as Bears head coach, but what an awful job the Bears did in creating an offensive ecosystem for Williams, who himself does need to be better. But the Bears' offensive ecosystem for Caleb Williams was like a junkyard in an area with, smog and heavy pollution and bacteria and disease growing everywhere. The Commanders' offensive ecosystem for Jayden Daniels is like a brilliant forest with plenty of sunshine and just enough rain and birds chirping and every animal coexisting peacefully. For years we heard about all of the great young offensive assistant coaches who the Skins had when Mike Shanahan was the team's executive vice president / head coach, and who the team let get away, and the lack of success that the team had with these guys, right? Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniel. We've all seen the graphic with their faces 1,000 times. And remember, there also is Kevin O'Connell, who was with the Skins when Jay Gruden was head coach. Well, here we are now with, in a lot of ways, a do-over. A chance to truly maximize and benefit from having high-level offensive assistants. Now, this situation is different in that the current well-regarded offensive assistants include more veterans in Cliff Kingsbury, Brian Johnson, and Anthony Lynn, but you get the idea. And the team does have 2 well-regarded young offensive assistants in Tavita Pritchard and David Blau. We this past Wednesday afternoon had this back and forth between Commanders insider Sam Fortier of the Washington Post and Dan Quinn.
The coaching staff continuity allow you to refine your development plan for coaches as well?
It does, and that's one of my big offseason goals, to see can we improve as a staff. And what does that mean, Dan? What does that look like? It's us improving to really help the players. And so for them to be at their very best, we also have to be improving. You can see how that, can work together. So it's not just this is what you need to do. It's also us rising with them to take it to new spots, think of new ways, new techniques, new teaching methods, new ways to communicate it. And if we can improve and not just say, well, let me just take out what we did last year and put it down, but in fact improve ourselves as coaches, as a staff, then you got a chance to do some really cool things, because it's not just one person growing. It's the player and the staff. And they feel that when the coaches digging in to find it. And the best of the best coaches, man, lie awake at night thinking, how am I effing going to get this guy better? And family show. And there's a lot of coaches here that do that. To say, I'm going to figure it out. And that's what's fun about this time. I said earlier, it's why it is their time to shine. There's a lot of teaching that has to go on. These next 3 weeks are critical for the players that are still learning the system or trying to find a role. And so we'll find out a lot. Every day matters, the drills matter, the teach-backs matter, because we're finding out a lot about them.
Got time for 3 more. Do you have a favorite principle to teach younger coaches, or things that you're focused on this year specifically that stand out?
Not a specific principle. Usually it involves something with communication. We could all say that. There's another piece that I dig into a lot on the planning. How are you going to use the practice reps? How are you going to use this part of individual to work something? And then the last part is an evaluation, okay? First, with ourselves as coaches, what is it that you want to improve on? And then the next step, what are you doing? What is the actual work on? And if you can get that part right, as from the self-awareness, say it, this is something I want to improve on, then it's much easier for me to assist and dig in to help back them on that.
And, of course, this Commanders offensive coaching staff continuity and the Commanders quality offensive ecosystem for Jayden Daniels, all of this stuff is part of the C word. No, not Commanders, but culture. We this past Wednesday afternoon had this exchange between Candy Waller of Bowie TV Sports and Dan Quinn.
Hey, Coach. We've heard repeatedly about what you've done for this culture and just guiding and leading the brotherhood. I know you've mentioned before that the team, they act on it, but so much from the players, coaches, they all talk about your role in this. So who do you lean on for that leadership style that you have? Where did you get a lot of that learning and teaching from to then share it with your organization here?
I think one of the early parts of leading is that you think it's, what can I do for them, for that. And then as you really get closer to people, it's developing the leaders, from within, because that to me, you're talking about the culture is how we act together. What are the things that we do on an everyday basis? So I love that you guys saw us competing, starting from bags and going through special teams, and then a 7-on-7 with guys really going to strain. Today's practice, for the first practice from afar, would not have looked like a first practice. But that came from the players of being ready and having that culture of hey man, when we go out to do this, let's go work on these specific things. And so for me, it's more gas onto that to say, all right, how do we get the whole group better, Kenny, by the attitude that they can bring for one another. And if they can look after one another and know what each other is working on and improving upon, then there's no limit to what you can become, because it's not reliant on one person watching you or you on your own figuring it out. It's a whole network of people just supporting the hell out of you. And that to me is what we're after and chasing. And this is absolutely the type of team that man, I'd want to play for and I'm dying to coach for, because they do really want to push one another to see how good they can get.
All right. Well, the work of the Commanders' offensive coaching staff last season was extremely good, just like the work of Catering by Uptown. If you are planning a party, a wedding, a corporate gathering, and aren't sure where to start or what to do, no worries. Just visit cateringbyuptown.com and make sure that you mention that Al Galdi sent you. Catering by Uptown is run by the Pereiras, who are great Commanders fans and loyal supporters of this podcast. Catering by Uptown provides both great service and a great price. Catering by Uptown is a family business, and it specializes in handling everything so that you don't have to. Catering by Uptown understands that special events deserve to be celebrated in style. Catering by Uptown takes care of every detail so that you can enjoy your event. Catering by Uptown is committed to meeting your needs and exceeding your expectations. Great service, amazing cuisine, and reliability are the foundation of what makes Catering by Uptown one of the most referred caterers throughout Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Northern Virginia. And know this, if you visit cateringbyuptown.com and click on venues, you can set up your own personal tour of one of Catering by Uptown's premier venues, including outstanding waterfront venues. Catering by Uptown offers the ability to coordinate services at over 100 of the best reception halls, vineyards, farms, historic homes, event venues, banquet facilities, and wedding venues in the area. Visit cateringbyuptown.com and make sure that you mention that Al Galdi sent you. That's cateringbyuptown.com and make sure that you mention that Al Galdi sent you.
Yo, it's D-Lo. I'm partnering with Ro. Women, y'all feel that? It's sexy. But if you're stressing about your performance, it throws you off. That's why I rock with Ro Sparks. Ro Sparks dissolve under your tongue and hit fast so you're ready when the moment pops off. You feel like a superhero. It's satisfying your partner. That's key. Ro Sparks help you last longer, stay fuller, and keep the whole vibe right. With Prescribe, new patients get $15 off their first order. Hit up ro.co/backyard and to see if Ro Sparks are right for you. That's ro.co/backyard and see if Ro Sparks are right for you.
Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved. Do not undergo FDA safety effectiveness or manufacturing review. For full safety information, go to ro.co/safety info.
If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Granger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Granger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRANGER, click Granger.com, or just stop by. Granger, for the ones who get it done.
The 2025 NBA Draft is this month. Will take place on June 25th and June 26th at Brooklyn's Barclays Center. The Wizards, they in the 2025 NBA Draft have the numbers 6, 18, and 40 overall picks. It was on May 12th that we had the 2025 NBA Draft lottery, in which the worst pick that the Wizards could have gotten was number 6, and that is precisely the pick that the Wizards got in typical Bullets/Wizards NBA Draft lottery luck. But the Wizards do have 3 of the top 40 picks in the 2025 NBA Draft, what will be the team's 3rd NBA Draft under Monumental basketball president Michael Winger and Wizards general manager Will Dawkins. So the team getting done dirty by the NBA Draft lottery yet again, of course, does not mean that this can't be a successful draft in the team's rebuild. I'm very pleased to welcome back to the Al Galdi podcast Wizards insider Chase Hughes of Monumental Sports Network. You can follow Chase on X at Chase DC Sports. And as we have game 1 of the NBA Finals this Thursday night, the Indiana Pacers at the Oklahoma City Thunder, Thursday night at 8:30, it is worth noting that the streak can continue. The streak is the streak of former Wizards players winning NBA titles, a streak that Chase has thoroughly chronicled. As you pointed out in a post on X late night this past Saturday night, quote, the Pacers are heading to the finals. If the Wizards streak of former players winning titles is to continue, then it will be up to Thomas Bryant and Quentin Jackson. No former Wizards on the Thunder. End quote. So, Chase, will the streak continue? That is the question.
Well, at least they have a chance, right? There are some players in the finals, but I think it's a little unlikely. I got the Thunder in 5 games. I mean, I really like what the Pacers have done. They're a great story. I love watching Tyrese Halliburton, but I think they're going to be overmatched against the Thunder. So my prediction is that streak ends this year, but again, they got a couple players in the finals, so it is possible. It's not quite like last year, though, because last year had Wizards players, former Wizards players on both teams, so you knew it was a guarantee. This year, there is a chance, but it's not guaranteed.
The streak has become comical. How far back does the streak go?
I believe it goes back to 2016. I need to double check it. It's not an easy thing to look up, but I believe it's 9 straight years. And I started chronicling this in 2020. It was after the Lakers won the championship. They had like Markieff Morris and a bunch of former Wizards players on the team. And I believe Dwight Howard was on that team. They had like 3 or 4. And at the time, it was the longest streak in the NBA of a team having their former players winning titles. And it was like, sometimes it was bit players like Jody Meeks on the Toronto Raptors. But that was 5 years ago, and it was the longest streak then. And of course, it's still the longest streak in the NBA.
Well, maybe one day we'll be talking about the Wizards being in an NBA Finals as opposed to just former Wizards players being in the NBA Finals. In the meantime, you were at the 2025 NBA Draft Combine, which took place May 11th through the 18th in Chicago. If the Wizards stick and pick at 6, is there a specific narrowed down group of players from which the Wizards will pick, or do you more consider who the Wizards might pick at 6 to be wide open?
I think it's fairly wide open, honestly. I mean, I think the top 2 picks in this draft are pretty solidified. Cooper Flagg going 1, Dylan Harper number 2. Whether that's to the Spurs, we'll see. His own dad, Ron Harper, has been on Twitter kind of suggesting maybe a trade could be in the works, but I do think he is the second best player in this draft. It might end up being the best player in this draft. Who knows? These guys are so young. After that, I really think it's a guessing game. A lot of mock drafts have Ace Bailey as the 3rd overall pick. I don't think that's a guarantee. He's got a lot to like about him, of course, but there's also varying opinions about him. And I could see the Philadelphia 76ers seeing a guy like VJ Edgecombe as the perfect complement to Tyrese Maxey in their backcourt. I could also see the Hornets thinking that about him with LaMelo Ball. So I think Edgecombe's the third best player in this draft. I think he'll go top 4, but I could see Ace Bailey going as high as 3, or maybe even falling to the Wizards at 6. And then there are just a lot of possibilities after that. I think Trey Johnson of Texas, I'm guessing he'll also be gone. He's a really talented player, maybe the best scorer, certainly at his position, maybe the best scorer in this draft. He was tremendous at Texas last year. I think he's probably going to be gone, but I could see him falling to 6. Jeremiah Fears, Oklahoma, he's another name I'd throw out there. Igor Demon of BYU, and then maybe as a bit of a dark horse, Kaman Malawach of Duke. He's not mocked as high as the Wizards are at 6, but he's a really talented prospect, so I could see him improving his stock in workouts.
You in a MonumentalSportsNetwork.com piece that came out on May 27th wrote about the possibility of Ace Bailey falling to the Wizards at 6. How realistic is that possibility?
Well, first of all, I should mention Derek Queen. I forgot his name. He's definitely a name who I think is firmly in the running for the Wizards at 6 overall. Ace Bailey falling to 6, I think it's possible because he's got some red flags that I think have been pretty apparent and have been pointed out and, are going to give teams pause when evaluating him. One is that he's not a very willing passer. He had, I think it was 11 games this year without a single assist and averaged about 1.3 assists per game. And, if you're picking a guy that high, you're going to want them to be much more than just a shooter, right? He's a tremendous shooter and he's 6'7.5" without shoes. So that could translate. And even if he isn't a great playmaker or a great defender, he could still top out as a Michael Porter Jr. type player who I think would be worth the 3rd overall pick if that's what he ends up being. But, he's got that concern about him. And then Rutgers, didn't win last year, and they had 2 prospective top 5 picks, and they didn't even make the NCAA tournament. How does that happen? And so I feel like that's going to be a red flag for both him and Dylan Harper. But Dylan Harper is so talented and so well-rounded. I think he solidified himself as the second best prospect. But Ace Bailey, again, I could see him going 3rd. That wouldn't surprise me. Or I could see him dropping a few spots. And, if he fell to 6, it's not like a precipitous fall. You're going from 3 to 6. I think he's going to go somewhere in that range, and it could be in the range that the Wizards are picking.
You mentioned the product of the University of Maryland, Derek Queen. Your last appearance on this podcast was on episode 1012, which came out on February 20th. I, on that episode, asked you if Derek Queen, who was on fire at the time, might be playing himself into being a top 5 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Would the Wizards taking Queen at 6 be too high for him?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I remember that conversation we had, and I think you asked, is it impossible that he could be a top 5 pick? And I kind of pushed back on that. At the time, I was like, yeah, I think he's going to be lottery. I think he's safely a first-round pick, safely in the lottery. Top 5 was a little rich for my blood at the time, but it's almost like you called it because now I expect him to go around the top 5. I think he'll be on the board when the Wizards are picking 6th, but I think he'll be a distinct possibility for them at number 6. My guess is he'll go somewhere between 6 and 10. But he just had a tremendous season at Maryland. I mean, probably their best freshman since Joe Smith, who went number 1 overall back, I think, in 1995. Really good offensive player. I wonder, with Kevin Willard, and they had a talented team, how far would they have gone without Derek Queen? I feel like he was a big reason for why they went to the Sweet 16. Obviously, he made the big shot in the tournament. I think he's a really talented offensive player. He's got some shortcomings on defense, but he forces a lot of turnovers. He averaged over a block and a steal per game. I really like that. Not a great outside shooter, but he's got tremendous touch around the rim. I mean, he is a really talented offensive player, and my favorite thing about him is just how quick he is for his size. The guy who I've compared him to is Alperen Şengün of the Houston Rockets, but kind of like Şengün, in a tight space, when he turns around, if he's at the elbow, he's got the ball in his hands 10, 15 feet from the basket. No one at his position can stay in front of him, and he's just so aggressive. And I see a lot of the same things with Derek Queen. Kind of like, I saw someone throw this comparison out on Twitter, and I like it a lot. Antoine Jamison, where, he's just quicker than the guy who's guarding him, and he can make shots from different angles, as we saw against Colorado State when he made the buzzer beater for Maryland.
If I told you that the Wizards don't pick at 6, what's more likely, that they trade up or trade down?
Definitely trade up. I think certainly there'd be a possibility that they feel like they can get the guy that they really like at 8 or 9 or something like that. But I would think it'd be trading up. Just looking at the timing of where they are in their rebuild, it's their third draft. You probably don't expect to be picking this high all that often, and you're kind of within striking distance if you wanted to move up to 4 or 3 or maybe even 2. I don't think the Mavs are going to part with the number 1 overall pick, but you're a lot closer than you might be 2 years from now. I know next year their pick is only top 8 protected, but, say you got the 7th or 8th pick next year, then, you'd have to pay a little bit more to move up. It seems like the timing would be right to be really aggressive and try to really just go for it and go get a guy who you feel like could be a cornerstone player for your rebuild.
Is there someone who strikes you as a player for whom the Wizards would want to trade up?
I think it would probably be Edgecombe or Harper. I don't think the difference between one of the other prospects, if they went at 4 or 5 and who could be there at 6 is that vast. But we saw them 2 years ago move up just one spot to go from 8 to 7 to get Bilal Coulibaly. And that's the way they really view the draft. Will Dawkins said this on the night of the lottery, that his philosophy is to set the draft board, find out who you want, and, find out how to get them. And if you have to trade up to get them, then so be it. So I would imagine it'd be trading up, and it would probably be for Edgecombe or Harper, because if not one of them, then, if you're trying to get, say Ace Bailey or Trey Johnson, one of them's probably going to be there at 6, or Jeremiah Fears. I feel like there's not a whole lot separating that sort of third tier, maybe that second tier of prospects in this draft.
We've seen the Wizards over their 2 NBA drafts under Michael Winger and Will Dawkins value upside. Do you expect that to continue to be the case in the 2025 NBA draft?
I do, at least with the 6th overall pick. I think 18th overall, maybe the timing might be right to pick a player who's a little bit more experienced, and that could speed up your timeline a little bit. And you just look at the rebuild and, when do you expect to compete? I would imagine they're a year or 2 away from hoping to contend for the playoffs, right? So if you picked a guy who played 3, 4, maybe even 5 years in college, as these guys nowadays do, maybe that guy would be more ready to be in a playoff rotation a year or 2 from now. There are a few players who could fit that mold. I don't know if Tyrese Proctor, if you could justify him at 18th overall, but Neat Clifford, we've been talking about Colorado State, who played Maryland in the NCAA tournament. He played 5 years in school. He's a really talented, versatile wing. So there are a few guys in this draft in that range at 18th overall where I feel like it could make a little bit of sense, but it also wouldn't be surprising if the Wizards tried to go with another one-and-done guy and took the long view, just hoping to, strike gold and get a star.
As you've gotten to know Michael Winger and Will Dawkins, and you've observed what they did over the first 2 NBA drafts with the Wizards, are there traits that you believe that Winger and Dawkins especially value in the NBA draft?
Yeah, the first one is definitely positional size. I think you can pretty much eliminate prospects who are undersized for their position. Jeremiah Fears is one that I wonder about because he's only about 6'2.5" without shoes. He's the size like a Darius Garland. That doesn't really fit the mold of what they've gone for so far. It doesn't really fit the mold of what Oklahoma City goes for, and that's where those guys kind of cut their teeth, especially Will Dawkins, their GM. So, Igor Dimin, on the other hand, he's 6'8.5" as a guard. He's about 6'9", 6'10" in shoes. He's got positional size. So I think that's something that they covet and, will probably be a through line when we look back on this draft as it has for their previous 2 drafts. Defense is also very important. I don't think they'll overlook defense entirely. Maybe they can overlook it a little bit now that they've drafted so much defense and maybe go for a guy like a Derek Queen who's more offense oriented. Shooting, they're willing to take their time to teach a guy how to shoot. That's definitely something that they haven't prioritized and made sort of a deal breaker for them. If a guy needs to learn how to shoot and it's going to take him 2 or 3 years, they're willing to take that time. So I think those would be the 3 traits overall. And then they've also, there's a couple things that have sort of been common traits for the guys that they've drafted. They seem to like pedigree. If a guy has, parents who played college basketball or professional basketball or who are coaches who, have been teaching their son to play basketball from a really young age, that seems to be something that they really like. But really it's positional size and defense more than anything.
We're talking with Wizards insider Chase Hughes of Monumental Sports Network. Both Michael Winger and Will Dawkins work for the Thunder. What can the Wizards learn from the Western Conference champion Thunder?
One thing would be that it can happen kind of quickly. Their 3rd draft is when they got Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams. So they already had SGA. They already had Lou Dort. They already had Josh Giddey, who they traded for Alex Caruso. So a lot of the pieces were in place, including the most important piece. But as they showed, one draft can kind of shift everything very significantly if you get two good players.
So the 2025 NBA Finals featuring the Pacers and Thunder means that we now have had 9 different teams in the last 5 NBA Finals. The current collective bargaining agreement between the NBA and NBA Players Association took effect on July 1st, 2023. The CBA includes what is known as the second apron, which essentially is a financial threshold at which offending teams are penalized harshly, and so a result, at least in theory, will be greater parity. Are we now seeing that parity? Is the NBA, of course, known for dynasties and known for extreme predictability in the postseason, now in the midst of an era of parity?
I think for the moment we are, but you look, at the history of the game, there tends to be a dynasty that comes along and sort of breaks up the parity. So I would imagine that's going to happen at some point. But certainly the new CBA has sort of tipped the scales in this direction, as has the overhaul of the NBA draft lottery odds. So this is the type of parity that Adam Silver and the NBA has been looking for. But, in just a one-year snapshot, I feel like you can't make too much of, a singular team making the finals or even winning a title. Like in the case of the Indiana Pacers, one thing that does stand out to me, and if we are in a sustained era of parity, is just how, as of December, I don't think anyone would have predicted that they would make this run in the playoffs. I know they were in the conference finals last year, but they really caught fire late, and maybe especially in the Eastern Conference where there's no juggernaut, and certainly the injuries to key players paved the way. But I like the idea of a league where a team could catch fire in March and then ride that to the NBA Finals. You see that in other sports. You see that in baseball. You see it in football. You see it in hockey. You even see it in college basketball. But in the NBA, I feel like you haven't really seen that. Maybe there'd be parity to a certain degree, but you could usually, predict the conference finals, sometimes even the finals. So I think this is going to be good for the league long term. I think the unpredictability leads to more fan bases feeling like their team has a chance, maybe entering training camp, certainly entering the playoffs now. And so I think it's going to benefit the league long term.
Along the lines of what we were just talking about, there also now is the theory that the era of big threes is over, that the NBA now with the second apron is more about having a big two or even a big 1.5 and depth. That depth now matters big time. What do you make of that?
I think to a certain extent, yes. I mean, you look at the Indiana Pacers, they do have a player who I believe is a superstar in Tyrese Halliburton, but after that, it's a lot of depth and guys who are in roles that they're just perfectly suited for. But it is also a copycat league, and I feel like if the Thunder win the NBA Finals, they've got a big three. They've got SGA, they've got Chet Holmgren, and they've got Jalen Williams. Now, they drafted 2 of those guys. They got the other one in a trade, so it wasn't like some of these other super teams that we've seen form, but they've got 3 all-star, borderline all-NBA players. So if you're a team that's trying to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder, I could see you trying to form your own big three in some form or fashion, and it's going to be more difficult than it used to be in the past. But it doesn't mean that teams won't find a way to do it and still try to do it. So I don't think we've fully moved beyond the big three era. I think it's just maybe a step to the side at the moment. And then, we'll see that they expect a lot of movement this offseason. So where does Giannis land? Where does Trae Young land? Like what do the Lakers do? What do some of these other teams do? The Celtics have to make some big moves. So we could see in just a few short months, another team or two with what we would consider to be a big three and consider to be a super team.
Final question. As the Wizards are rebuilding, what matters more in the current NBA, being very good offensively or being very good defensively?
I believe it's defense, and I think the Wizards front office sees it the same way, and that's why they're trying to build their defense first. Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr, and Keyshawn George, I think in particular, were defensive picks. And Coulibaly and Sarr in particular, those were the 2 first high draft picks that they made, and they went essentially all in on the defensive end. And, we'll see. Maybe the Pacers beat the Thunder, and my prediction's wrong. But if the Thunder win, they have the number 1 defense. They have actually one of the better defenses we've seen in a really long time. And if you go back and look at championship teams this century and going back through the 90s and 80s, pretty much invariably to win a championship, you have to have a top 10 defensive rating in the regular season. And the teams that didn't usually had an elite defense once the playoffs started. Like there were a couple teams I could give you examples. I think it was like the 01-02 Lakers. They were like 20th in defense, but they were top 5 the year before, and they became a top 5 defense during their playoff run. The Golden State Warriors, I think it was 2017, 2018, had like the 14th ranked defense, but they had the number 1 defense in the playoffs. So I think defense still wins championships, but certainly you can't have a below average offense and win a title. Really, the recipe is top 10 on both ends of the floor. And the Pacers are kind of an experiment in that regard. I think they're 9th in offense. They're much better in offense in the playoffs, but they were like 13th in defense. So they were fairly average. Their makeup is kind of similar in that regard, just specifically that to like the Denver Nuggets, who won a title a few years ago, had about an average defense, but were able to make it work with an elite offense. So we'll see if they can get it done. But I mean, if the Thunder win, that's going to be the takeaway: elite defense.
Great insight, Wizards insider Chase Hughes of Monumental Sports Network. Chase, always enjoy talking to you, man. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for you and me for now. Keep the feedback coming. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You can email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Wednesday show, episode 1087. We'll include a lot for you on the Commanders. Also on Wednesday show, I'll talk Nationals and Orioles. The Nats are home to the Chicago Cubs Tuesday evening at 6:45 in Game 1 of a 3-game series. The O's are at the Seattle Mariners Tuesday night at 9:40 in Game 1 of a 3-game series. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday. Wow, the Commanders took Ben Sinnott in the second round of the 2024 NFL Draft. You think that he could be in trouble?
I mean, I don't know if he could be in trouble, but I always think like you want to win games and you want to find talent. You want guys that can help you. And so this is not an indictment of Ben. I just think it's a much more competitive room than I thought at the beginning of the offseason.